never burn a bridge, because you never know in this industry. I would say don't be afraid to explore a turf that you're not familiar with right now. Don't be afraid to open that door when you just like this door. Go open it and go there.
Dennis, nobody has ever been Hall of Fame for DCI Drum Corps International, WGI Hall of Fame, or Percussive Art Society Hall of Fame ever in the history of percussion. What you do is so special, it is so different, it is so unique. You have so much information and knowledge about percussion and drum corps and drumming from the history. I want to tap into all of this.
You don't think I'm going to share it with you, do you? Fat chance, pal.
I want those secrets for sure, man. Welcome and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Dom. And this has been a great series that you've been doing, and I'm really honored to be here. And I know most of the folks you've interviewed are drum set players, jazz artists, guitarists, bass players with Chick Corea. I mean, you know, and now little old Denny D. So this is a real honor. So thank you very much.
Well, Denny D has done amazing things in his lifetime, and I want to make sure I capture the story, because what you have done and what you continue to do has been a wave in the drum corps world, worldwide, that you have reached. As I traveled globally, as you know, your name comes up everywhere. It's unbelievable the respect that you have earned in this industry, and I want to make sure we capture that people understand that. Where did music and drumming enter your life at a young age?
I grew up in Bergenfield, New Jersey, which is a town of about 30,000 in the northeast corner of New Jersey, not terribly far from the George Washington Bridge.
Yeah.
And that fact came into play in my life a little bit later on, because my friends and I used to go into Birdland all the time.
Interesting.
Every Friday night for $2, you know, in the good old days, you know. And we lived on Legion Drive. So the Bergenfield American Legion post was right across the street.
Yeah.
And they had a little drum corps. And I used to go and watch them practice, and just became infatuated with the drummers there, of course. And I said, you know what? I think I want to do that. So I would just watch and watch and watch. And then in 6th grade, in Washington School in Bergenfield, I started to take lessons in school. I almost quit at the end of 6th grade, because there, elementary school was K to 6, and then everybody went to the junior high school. I was the only drummer in my elementary school. So I had no idea whether I was any good or not. And my teacher told me, you're doing great, but I had nothing to compare to, you know? So I almost quit. At the end of the school year, the principal sends a message to me. He says, I want you in my office at 2 o'clock today. Okay. So I show up, I walk in, the principal, Mr. Bongan, is there, the assistant principal, Mr. Hindera, is there, the music teacher, Mr. Mura, is there, and my mother and father are there. And I walked in, and it's like, okay, what's this? And they said, you're not quitting, no matter what you do. At some point in your life, if you don't want to drum anymore, that's your business, but you're not going to quit because you've got too much to offer.
Interesting.
And that was a turning point, Dom. I mean, because I was ready to just say, okay, I don't think I'm very good.
Yeah.
You know? I kind of became infatuated with Benny Goodman's Sing Sing Sing, Gene Krupa, and family could not afford a drum set, so and it's interesting because of the sessions I've watched, how many guys have said this same thing to you. They started out with their practice pad on the edge of the bed, and then, you know, a football, and that was me. My practice pad was a snare drum, basketball was my ride, a partially deflated football, kind of the Tom Brady model, was my rack top, and an upside down garbage can was my floor top, and my bass drum and hi-hat were in my imagination. And I would play along to the top 40 tunes of the day. And then my uncle, who lived across the hall, one day said to me, Gene Krupa was fronting his own band at the time, and I was probably 13. And my uncle said to me, you want to go? And I said, yeah.
Sure.
So he takes me to the concert. Now I'm in heaven. I mean, I'm hearing Gene Krupa live now, right? And my uncle worked for the town, so he knew all the cops and all the security people. So the concert's over, and he says to me, do you want to see if we can meet him?
Huge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we go, and he knew the cop at the backstage door, and he said, you know, my nephew here is a young drummer. Is there any way you could get to meet Mr. Krupa? And the guy says, wait here, and he disappears, and he comes back, and he waves us in. So now we're standing backstage, and it was, I believe it was in an armory, and the stage was built up, you know, from the floor kind of thing, right? So 5 minutes later, here comes Gene Krupa, jacket open, tie off. You know, he was a very, very handsome guy, you know. Yeah. And he came right up to me, puts his hand out, "What's your name?" And I'm sure I stammered something, or, you know, managed to get Dennis out somehow. So he said, "Do you play drums, Dennis?" "Yes, sir." "Can you play paradiddles, Dennis?" "Yes, sir." He hands me a pair of sticks. Oh my God. He's got a pair of sticks. He says, "Come on, let's go play paradiddles."
Oh, is this incredible?
So we go to the edge of the stage, and here I am, just saying, "Hands don't fail me now." You know what I mean? Here I am with Gene Krupa playing paradiddles. I am in, you know, freaking heaven here, you know? And we played some paradiddles, and, you know, he's twirling sticks and everything, and I'm just going, ooh. And he puts his hand on my shoulder, and he says, "Don't you stop playing, you have beautiful hands."
Oh, great.
And he hands me hands me the sticks, and I went to give him back, and he said, "No, you can keep them."
Gene was that kind of a person. He was everyone that I had never met him, but everyone that spoke about it, he just had this incredible giving personality.
Yeah.
You experienced that. That's huge.
It's the way he played, right?
Absolutely. He always played that way.
Yeah, it's the way he played. Then I joined a drum corps, that drum corps that used to practice across the street. I joined them. They were taught by a great guy named Bobby Thompson.
Wow.
Who in Rochester also taught Steve Gadd.
Absolutely.
When Steve was doing his drum corps thing, which was very cool. So I did the drum corps thing, but only for 1 year. I only marched 1 year. I was 14, 15 at the time. Yeah. So now it's like 1958. There was a record store in Bergenfield, and I walked into every day after school. One day I walk in, and on the sound system, there's this thing I had never heard. So I said to the owner, "What is that?" And he says, "That's the Ahmad Jamal trio," and he's playing Poinciana.
Vernel Fournier.
Yeah, absolutely, Vernel Fournier.
Right, yeah.
Who's a drummer that we should all pay a lot of attention to.
Absolutely. And I always say to the listeners, you mention that name, do the research. Phenomenal drummer.
Incredible.
Poinciana, absolutely.
Poinciana. Yeah. So now I don't know anything about independence or anything, so I'm listening to boom, ga-dum, 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 boom. And the improv section, he's playing all these beautiful rhythms around the kit, but there's this upbeat cymbal going on. And I said, wow, they have two drummers, because it's impossible for one guy to do that, right? Because up to this point, my drumming was what I call dependent drumming. The left hand and the right hand depend upon each other to play a roll or a paradiddle or whatever. So the world of independence was totally foreign to me, knew nothing about it. Yeah. So I get a chance to go to see the Jamal Trio in concert. And they play Poinciana, and I'm going, okay, where's the other drummer? Well, there isn't another drummer, because Vernel is playing all this remarkable independent stuff, and I just go, oh my God. So I said, okay, I'm going to teach myself, because I was self-taught. Yeah. I'm going to teach myself how to do that. It took a long time, but I did. And so that was probably late 58, and then 59, Brubeck's Time Out comes out.
Absolutely,
and
I
fell in love with Joe.
Yeah.
And that same year, Miles Davis' Kind of Blue comes out. So in that 6-month period, Ahmad Jamal, Dave Brubeck with Joe, and Miles Davis Quintet.
Jimmy Cobb,
and Bill Evans, and Coltrane, and Cannonball. It was remarkable. So I was hooked on jazz now. Wow. And that little time period got me away from strict rudiments and strongly affected the way when I started to write drum charts. That moment in jazz developed my love for the art form and strongly influenced the way I wrote.
Fantastic. But boy, that's interesting, because now that you say that, you know, in some of the writings that I've seen you have a looser way of writing within the discipline of drum corps music. Boy, that's very interesting. So you said you were self-taught on drum set. Were you playing with any bands at all, drum set at all? Or?
I had a local band that played, you know, rock gigs and weddings and stuff like that. Then when I was in college, a good friend of mine in college, whose name was Tom Janut, wanted to start, he was Greek, wanted to start his own Greek band. And he had heard me play, and he said, come on, man, I want you to be my drummer. And I said, Tom, I don't know anything about Greek music. I'm an Italian-Irish kid. What do I know about that? He said, don't worry about it. We'll go to all the clubs in New York. We'll go and we'll see how the drum set player in that genre uses the kit, which is different than what we used to doing. because there's really no ride cymbal work per se.
Yeah,
it's
very,
all
very
on the skins.
Different thing, yeah.
So I did that. Didn't know anything about Greek music, but I learned fast. And I'll never forget this, Don. There's one of their dances is called a tsamiko. It's a slow 3/4,
Yeah.
where the rhythm is dum, dum, over and over and over and over. So the first 4 or 5 gigs I played with this group, I'm not Greek, right? So I'm not going to mess around here, man. I'm playing that rhythm, get used to it. By about the 5th or 6th gig, I'm playing dum, and all of a sudden my hi-hat starts going boom, 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 boom. The next thing I know, I'm Joe Morello. I'm going boom, ding, da, ding, boom, ding, ding, and I just had a ball because all that odd meter stuff is in 7 and 9.
Oh,
and
all the Greek stuff is in odd times.
Yeah.
And at that time with Brubeck, Morello,
Right.
5/4 and 3/4 was all of a sudden becoming a very 9/8 that was all of a sudden opening up and very
Absolutely.
influential by that.
Absolutely.
Boy, how perfect timing that was.
Oh, it was incredible. It was great.
So the drum corps thing now, how did you further go into the drum corps thing at that time?
My 2 mentors in Bergenfield in the school district were the late, great Dr. Bernard Baggs, who supervised the whole music program throughout the district.
Yeah.
And when I was a junior, he brought in a young guy named Donald Angelica, who was really very instrumental in the formation of DCI and how it became a creative force rather than just a militaristic force.
Right, interesting.
So those 2 guys were my mentors for life until the day they died. I hung on there every word, and they got me through a lot of stuff. So I graduated from college in '66. The Vietnam War is exploding.
In the middle of it, yeah.
I get drafted. Baggs and Angelica wrote letters of recommendation for me for the West Point band, for the Hellcats at West Point, where John S. Pratt was stationed
Absolutely.
for 20 years.
Yeah.
So I go up there and I win the audition. So now I'm a member of the Hellcats at West Point. And I'm with Pratt, and I'm with a bunch of guys for the first time in my life who were much better players than I was. They knew more and they played better. And I'm going, whoa, boy, okay, Junior, strap in, But it was an amazing experience for me. And Ed became good friends with a guy named Bob Devlin, who had come out of the Boston Crusaders.
Yeah.
He and I became very close friends. He was teaching a local corps near West Point, and he said to me, come teach with me. And I said, Bobby, I've never done that.
Yeah.
He said, well, come on, you'll learn. So we did, and that's how I got started teaching. It was called the Pacers from Poughkeepsie, New York. When I got out of the Army in late '69, came back to Jersey, and Don Angelica had convinced the people who ran the Hawthorne Muchachos Drum and Bugle Corps to give this kid a shot, because no one had heard of me at that point. And I did, and then that's where I started to use my jazz and Latin background to that corps which played Latin music.
Fantastic, fantastic. Now, just so the listeners understand, John Pratt is a deep, committed rudimentalist at the highest form. His books, 14 Modern Contest Solos, available on Alfred Books. It's a must-have to learn from.
Right.
What was it like working with John Pratt?
Interesting, because first of all, he was an amazing player, an amazing rudimental player.
Yeah.
And that's where it stopped with him. But I mean, he was just silly, great as a rudimental player. He was also an eccentric kind of guy. Here's my favorite Pratt story. He and his family lived on West Point ground. That was their housing.
Yeah.
And he used to stand on his roof in the summertime and water the lawn from standing on the roof. And one day the MPs come over and they go, hey, what are you doing up there? And he goes, shh, the grass thinks it's raining. That's it. I'm telling that story until the day I die. I mean, that's a classic story. But he wrote all this stuff for the Hellcats.
Yeah.
And so it was pretty involved.
But to have that influence
It was great.
is amazing. So now you come out, the service, what happens then?
I go back to New Jersey. I start to teach the Hawthorne Muchachos.
Right.
And I taught them for 6 years. And I guess probably one of the things that I'm most proud about in my career is having taken a whole different group of drum corps and marching bands, but mostly drum corps.
Yeah.
And it seemed that every time I was hired, that group was kind of at this level, and within a year or 2 or 3, they were at this. Not just me. I mean, it was the staff. It was a collaborative effort, but we were able to take all of these kids and bring them to much greater heights.
But that missing ingredient, that push, was you. I mean, many of the people that I have spoken to that were under the tutorage of yourself really felt the motivation, the clarity, the leadership. I mean, you delivered a lot of things to lift these up. So I love your humility, but let me tell you something. You really changed the way drum corps is seen now. From whatever vision you had, it's working still to this day.
Well, thank you. I think that gives me way too much credit because there were, you know, putting a drum corps show together, designing a show is very much like putting a Broadway musical together. There's the music guy, there's the choreographer, there's the visual designer, there's the staging people, you know, and all of that has to come together to work. And it's the same thing with putting a drum corps show together. Yeah. You've got the brass arranger, hands it off to the percussion arranger, hands it off to the drill designer, hands it off to the choreographer, and you go from, you get together, I don't want to play that music, let's try this.
Interesting.
I think sometimes, Dom, to be honest, I think I've gotten too much credit because it's always a collaborative effort that always ends up in the hands of the people that are teaching alongside of me who were absolutely magnificent teachers. Yeah. And ultimately with the kids who became so dedicated and devoted to what we were trying to accomplish.
Yeah, but I think your passion has the ability of being able to suck people in to want to be better than who they are, not only as players, but as people. I've witnessed this, so I've seen this with you, so that's a very, very powerful skill. Whether it's a natural skill or whether it's something that you are aware of that you've done, that's a whole nother level of discussion. That's hugely powerful and important to have in any situation.
Oh, thank
that
you
clarity
very
of
much.
leadership, for sure.
Thank you.
So you go on, you're doing this, you start to write now, where you're composing more?
Yeah, and around the same time, now we're talking about the mid-70s.
Yeah.
And the muchachos had gotten to be
huge,
pretty
big, yeah.
I get a call one day from Lloyd McCausland at Remo.
Yeah.
It's time for us to sign you. What?
God rest his soul.
Then I get a call from Al Lamert and Bill Ludwig at Ludwig. You should be part of our, you know, so that started my involvement with all the corporations, which has been a run. I'm currently with Yamaha.
Yeah.
I was with Premier for 17 years before Yamaha, and I've been with Sabian since 1987.
Fantastic.
Never left.
Yeah.
Remo, of course.
Yeah.
Vic Firth sticks, and then Promark, and now I'm with Malitech. They make my sticks now.
Fantastic.
But the business side has always been very important to me.
Well, this is an important part of it too, because a part of what we do here is to understand how do you balance all that. I mean, you've written, author of books, you've got the companies that you're working with, teaching, you've got a lot that you're balancing. How do you organize all this?
Well, that's the right word.
Yeah.
It's all about organization. Yeah. I'm an outline freak. The books that I've written, the charts that I write, I do an outline first, and then I get down to the nitty-gritty off of the outline. I find that to be, whether it's running a business or writing a drum chart, whatever it is, or writing a book, it's all about the outline. So I always start there. And then I'm pretty organized, so I can stay focused pretty well.
Yeah.
And I think that's an important attribute to have.
Where do you think you learned that from?
I think from Dr. Baggs in Bergenfield.
Interesting.
Who was an absolutely brilliant man. I mean, had 2 PhDs by the time he was 22, and I hung on every word. I only understood about 10% of his words, but I hung on every one, you know. Teach me. And just watching him.
What do you think he saw in you?
We had an interesting conversation, several interesting conversations over the years, but one of which was, he said to me, this is after school, I'm in his office, just the two of us, and he taught me about the beauty and the perils of being a naturally gifted anything, drummer, writer, clarinet player, whatever. Yeah. And I said, well, what do you mean? He said, well, you're a very naturally gifted drummer. The downside is, the peril is, you might not take yourself seriously enough to master. You might just assume that, hey, I got all this going, I'm cool. Also learned an interesting lesson in 9th grade. And the band is rehearsing because we were invited to the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade. And so there were 4 snares. The snare drum book at the time was just horrible. This is like 1959 or 60, somewhere around there. I had done my year of drum corps. So at rehearsal, I would throw my snares off and ad-lib tenor drum parts while the other 3 snares played the written material. He doesn't say anything until the Monday of Thanksgiving week. Rehearsing after school, 5 minutes in, he stops the band. And he points at me and he says, "It's time for you to leave." What? He said, "Put your drum away and go home." Whoa. So I put my drum away and I walk home. Walk into my house, my mom is there. She said, "You're home early, what's going on?" So I told her, I couldn't lie to my mother, so I told her what happened. She grabs me by the ear, she says, "Put your coat back on." I put my coat on, she puts hers on, and we walk back to school, and she says, "Now stand on the sideline until the rehearsal's over." Rehearsal ended, she said, "Now go and apologize to Dr. Baggs," which I did. And he said, "Come see me tomorrow morning and I'll decide whether I let you back in band or not."
Oh my gosh.
So that was a lesson on many levels, Dom, because I realized years later, wow, that son of a gun. He could have thrown me out 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
He could have thrown me out on Wednesday, but then he doesn't have me in his band. Threw me out 2 weeks ago, it doesn't have the impact. He threw me out on Monday of Thanksgiving week, knowing damn well we're gonna make amends on Tuesday and everything's cool, right?
Brilliant.
So the lesson was just
Brilliant.
unbelievable.
Brilliant.
It was unbelievable.
I had the chance of going to Basel, Switzerland this past February. And I went to the festival that they have.
Yeah.
3 days, starts at 4 o'clock in the morning.
Right.
And they said like the history of drum corps kind of started there. I mean, it was just such an incredible marching in the streets, 18,000 people marching with fifes and drums and old school. It was an amazing experience to witness and be a part of.
Well, drum corps in the United States really began in the 20s, after World War I. And both the VFW and the American Legion started to sponsor individual drum corps at local posts, and then a national competition. And at first it was designed for senior corps, which means there was no age limit.
Okay.
So the veterans coming home from the war could participate, didn't matter how old you were. Junior corps, which has an age limit of 21, became something by both the American Legion and VFW in the mid to late 30s. And really not much changed until the late 60s, when drum corps people started to become more adventurous and started to want to explore different instruments and different forms of expression and so forth. The Swiss Rudiments did not make their way into American drum corps until the very early 60s. And Jack Pratt, Bobby Thompson, Les Parks were the three guys that kind of brought the Swiss Army triplet and the patafla and those Swiss rudiments to the United States, and that's where that started. But Basel, boy, those guys could play a five-stroke roll and have more expression in it than it was just rah!
Yeah.
And just like, oh my God, this is great.
And half of them, they all wear their costumes, so you don't know men, women, kids. But when they finally took a break and they gave the command to take their masks off, I saw young girls, young boys, women, elderly people, all playing drums and or fife. Everyone was involved in the process.
Everyone.
It was amazing to see. Guys like, studying with Joe Morello, of course, George Lawrence Stone was his mentor and teacher for many, many years. And I had an old NARD book, the National Association of Rudimental Drummers.
Sure.
And that picture in that beginning has George Lawrence Stone and J. Burns Moore and William Ludwig the first, in that book, starting this organization, I think it was back in 1933, where they started to put these rudiments together. Was that the beginning of the American organized rudimental scene? Or?
The rudiments came to the United States during the Revolutionary War by way of Switzerland, France.
Right.
Okay? And of course, everybody with the rope drums, we were using I wasn't alive yet, Dom. 7-stroke roll, because the tempos were between 92 and 110. So a 5-stroke roll wouldn't sound like a roll, it's too open. So the 7-stroke roll, the 15-stroke roll, all of that stuff. Then during the military band era under John Philip Sousa, that right around the turn of the century, the tempos went from 92 to 110 up to 120 became the norm. That's when the rudiments, the American interpretation of the rudiments, started to really solidify. And then the NARD, those guys, put the list together. And they put a list of 26 rudiments together. And out of that 26, they chose 13 that would be the quiz for acceptance into the NARD. You had to know these 13, which came out of the 26.
How intense.
Yeah.
For these guys, they had a vision at that time that was really, incredible to see what was going on with it. Then back in 1985, I think it was around that time,
Yes.
PAS decided to add more.
That's correct.
How did that all come about?
Came about because if you look at the difference between the 26 rudiments
Right.
and the PAS 40,
Right.
most of that additional 14, they left the 26 intact. They didn't eliminate any.
Right.
Most of the additional 14 are Swiss-based. So the patafla is in there, and the Swiss Army triplet, and the flammed mill stroke. Some of those more common Swiss rudiments made their way because at that time they had become standard part of the American literature.
Right. Where do you think your discipline comes from? I mean, you've got some great disciplines in how you speak, how you teach. I've seen you on stage as an MC, that you were flawless in your skills, of your communication skills, in how to explain this, and just how you delivered the information so beautifully well. You sucked everybody in that audience in, hanging on every word that you were saying. Where did those disciplines come from?
I'm not sure. I mean, I never studied, anything like public speaking or anything like that. I listen very well. So I would listen to Dr. Baggs. I would listen to Dom Famularo. I would listen to anybody who was in a clinic situation or on stage, and try to learn from that.
But it's an interesting skill, because that really takes, a real compassionate person to want to be able to feel what other people feel. So those are qualities that I think are very important for any generation to understand, that that's an important quality for learning. But you always impress me as a constant student. You're like constantly learning and researching. How do you pull that off?
Stay observant.
Yeah.
Listen.
Yeah.
Keep my mind open to anything and everything.
Yeah.
Don't close my mind to Greek music or
Yeah.
drum corps music or Latin jazz or big band. I mean, I've tried to soak it all in and incorporate it.
Well, that's powerful. It's amazing to see many of the videos that are on YouTube of many of the DCI and all the marching. Where do you see it going?
The evolution has been interesting in that when DCI was formed, which was in 1972, it was formed by a group of people who wanted to break away from the strict rules and regulations of the American Legion VFW. For example, prior to DCI, all percussion accessories were deemed illegal. You couldn't use a cowbell or a tambourine or maracas or a claves.
Interesting.
All illegal. You had to play, I could play on my snare drum with sticks, but not with mallets or brushes. So it was that kind of thinking that the drum corps people of the late 60s into the early 70s wanted to get away from and create their own art form.
Yeah.
So they did that starting in 72. And a great man, the great late Fred Sanford, was writing for a terrific drum corps from California called the Santa Clara Vanguard. And I think Fred deserves the lion's share of the credit for making drum corps percussion, especially, acceptable in music education circles because of how brilliantly he wrote.
Interesting.
I was competing against that from the East Coast, and I'll never forget the first time I saw them live, which was probably 73 or 74. I'm just getting going with my Hawthorne muchachos. And I see Santa Clara Vanguard, and I'm standing on the sideline, and I go, "Hot shot, your career is over before it's even beginning, because you can't do that. That's a different planet." So, but we worked through it, and we kept building and changing the rules and allowing for pit percussion to be legalized, and then ultimately allowing the pit instruments to be mic'd, which didn't happen until 2004. You were not allowed to mic anything.
Really interesting.
And then in 2009, it became legal to use a synth or a guitar or any electronic instrument in addition to miking the acoustic instruments. So all of that is very recent.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Where do you think the Scottish part of playing comes in? When I see these Scottish, fantastic, Alex Duthert and all these different people that I've witnessed in the past how does that influence come into the American style of playing?
Well, first of all, have you ever heard those guys try to play without beer? No, you haven't.
Point well taken.
Boy, they could play. Jimmy Kilpatrick is just unbelievable.
Jimmy is unbelievable.
Yeah, it's unbelievable.
Yeah.
I don't think the Scottish style has had as much influence on American drumming as the Swiss style.
Interesting.
Swiss style is very important to American drumming at this point.
Yeah. Funny, because I was just with Carl Williams a wonderful Scottish drummer in the UK just a few weeks ago. And just the tradition of them playing and keeping that going is a whole nother world of drum corps. The drums, I have a Cooperman drum home.
Oh.
That was given to me by Pat Cooperman. And they had designed a drum for Moeller that he had played. Sanford Augustus Moeller had played the Cooperman drums. And when Moeller had died, they gave a drum to Jim Chapin. And so Jim Chapin had this Cooperman drum that he played for many, many years. When Jim Chapin had passed away, they had contacted me and said, Don, we want you to have one of the Moeller drums.
Wow.
So I have this drum in my studio, and the rope, coiling on the side and the way it's tuned and the casket heads and the catgut, what an incredible, instrument it is.
Oh yeah, but you had to know how to play.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because today everybody's using a Kevlar-based batter head, and you could.
The response is incredible.
The response is crazy.
Those calfskin heads were like a pillow.
Today's like the old guard, the fife and drum corps, they're using a thin Kevlar head made in Switzerland on their rope drums. So they're not using natural calf anymore.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So the weather doesn't bother it.
And that changes the feel, that changes the sound, that changes everything, right?
Everything. Everything. We had to dig in.
Yeah.
You had to play big.
Yeah. So now the technique has come down much lower.
Yeah.
The pitch of the drums is much higher, so it
Much
seems
higher.
to cut better.
Yeah.
Playing outside.
Right.
Where do you see this going? Where do you see? I mean, I see these young players playing, and I am just beyond impressed.
Yeah.
With the level of discipline that they're practicing, their technique, their speed, their control, their precision, everything is just at a high level. Can it go higher than that? Where do you think it'll go?
It's hard for me to imagine. I mean, all the changes between the late 60s, right, under the American Legion VFW, and what we see today, I can understand all those changes. I was somewhat instrumental in making some of them happen along the way. Where you go from here, in a football stadium where you can't alter the lighting. So, we're doing this interview. I mean, if we were just using house lights, we don't have this interview, do we? Right?
Exactly right.
So it's specialized lighting to create the right video.
Yeah.
Well, the corps don't have that opportunity. So, but electronics are everywhere, and there are some corps that are exploring some unbelievable stuff.
Yeah.
And I think that's going to continue for a while. I'm not sure that there's an end game to it. It's just somebody's going to try something.
Yeah.
And everybody else is going to go, wow, okay, and then here we go.
The composers, the compositions that are being written, some of this stuff is, I look at it on a piece of paper, and I would have to shed for weeks to get through the first line. I mean, some of this stuff is that intense.
Yeah.
In some of the writing stuff, and as you as a composer, where's that stuff, how's it come to you? How do you write this stuff? What inspires you to put this stuff together?
Well, that's interesting because in the drum corps world, the marching percussion world, there's no place to go to school and learn how to do that.
Absolutely.
So you learn by observing, you learn by doing, you learn by listening, you learn by trying, experimenting, and failing, and then say, okay, well, if I do it this way. I think that it's become so involved, and the internet certainly has helped, social media, because now the kids don't have to fly to Santa Clara, California to audition. They submit it on tape. On video, or online.
Yeah.
And that's where a lot of the writing has come from. So we talk about hybrid rudiments, okay, which by the way, I'm not a fan of because I think everything outside of a single paradiddle is a hybrid of sorts, right? Exactly. So I'm not a big fan, and some of the names that have been, Shirley Murphy and. Book report. Maybe I'm too old. I don't know.
They're pushing the edge on that.
They're
for sure.
pushing. Yeah. But that stuff all came about by different kids just trying something and messing around with something, and then putting a name on it and putting it out over the internet, and everyone, it's a book report. The writing is very complex. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah.
It's very, very complex.
Well, I think what's amazing about it is the fact that there's still a passion from this younger generation to be involved with the art form and to push the art form. I think that's a good thing.
It's a very good thing. And in the last 20 years or so, 25 years now maybe, there's this whole thing known as indoor drumline that WGI, Winter Guard International, sponsors nationally. And that has given kids and writers and teachers and judges who like this particular genre
Yeah,
of drumming
yeah.
a year-round opportunity because they can do their marching band in the fall, their indoor drum line in the winter, and the drum corps. And it's just like, oh my God, how good can you get to be? My God.
24/7 all year round.
Unbelievable.
It's incredible to see, and as I travel the globe and I see it, it's catching on even more now in certain parts of the world that we had never seen before.
Correct.
So do you start to see a global involvement coming in now?
I do. DCI a few years ago initiated 2 subsets, one they call Sound Sport and one they call Drumline Battle. And the idea in both is anything goes. So in Sound Sport, they tend to be smaller groups, but a bagpipe band from Dublin can compete against the marching band and compete against an Indonesian champion or whatever, because anything goes.
Yeah.
And Drumline Battle is set up with 2 drum lines facing each other. One drum line will do its thing, and then stop, and then the other drum line will play its thing, and then there's a panel of 3 judges that decides, okay, you win this round. So DCI has picked up on that in the last, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 years or so. That's part of DCI Championship Week now.
So part of that competitiveness probably helps push it even a little further too now.
There's no doubt about it.
Yeah.
I used to have disagreements with certain educators who would talk about not wanting to compete with music.
Yeah.
And I would say, you got to get off that high horse,
Yeah.
because every day in our lives, in music or not, is a competition.
Absolutely.
You want to apply for a job?
Yeah.
It's a competition.
Right.
You want a promotion? It's a competition. So everything we do in life is competitive. Why should we not do this? And it has elevated the art form to a place that I never imagined I would see back in the 70s when I started.
Well, it really is a propellant. I mean, and if it can propel it forward, which is what it's doing, we're going to win.
Yeah.
We're going to open up levels of creativity that we probably never imagined before.
I think that's true.
How interesting. In closing, Dennis, what we have these it's about these kids watching this that are tapping into what you do, the passion that you have. What would you say to them, whether it's drum corps or just in the music industry? What would you say to them to give them the hope to fulfill their dreams being involved with music?
Among other things, I would say never burn a bridge, because you never know in this industry.
Great.
I would say don't be afraid to explore a turf that you're not familiar with right now. Don't be afraid to open that door when you just like this door. Go open it. Go there.
Yeah.
Always respect the people who paved the way for you to be where you are today, and respect your colleagues, your judges, your cohorts, your competitors, and especially respect the kids or the adults if you're teaching an adult corps.
Yeah.
Always respect them. Give them the same demeanor that you would want given to you.
If there was ever a Hall of Fame for inspiration, you would be at the top of the game on that one too.
You're too kind.
Dennis, I thank you so much.
Thank you, Don.
Great job.
Thank you so much. And by the way, I have to mention this. Drum corps has given me everything, including my wonderful wife, Rini, who I met by teaching the same corps together
Fantastic.
in the early 80s. So
that is beautiful. Good for you, man. Thank you, Rini. You're doing a great job. Thank you, Dennis.
thank you, Dom. Thank you very much.
Fantastic.